Undead Labs is the company that makes the State of Decay series. Alright? Now, a little bit of history here. Way back when in 2013, State of Decay 1 was released. It was a indie title. It was not made by a major studio. Undead Labs was not owned by anyone or anything like that. And when it came out, it was shockingly good. It came out in the summer of 2013. It was an open world game where you played as a survivor that teamed up with other survivors in a third-person environment against a bunch of zombies and mutated freaks. Your goal was to not only survive, but to build your own kind of base, like almost like a simulator style. You build up your defenses, you raise crops. It's kind of like a survival game where you build up your colony. You have the ability to craft weapons and ammo and stuff like that, but then you venture out into the world to rescue more survivors and to complete missions and story and all kinds of stuff. It was a good combination of exploration, survival, simulation, and it's a good story elements. I really enjoyed the game. It was one of my favorite games of that year because it was just surprisingly good for what it was. Okay? Now, what ended up happening is that the game was so good that they decided to make a sequel, State of Decay 2. And during the development of State of Decay 2 is apparently where some of the major problems started to happen with the studio. Apparently the guy who was the studio head kind of decided that he didn't really want to focus primarily on this project or this studio anymore, and started to split his focus between other companies and projects, to the point where people were saying there basically was no upper management leadership really anymore. About halfway through development, things kind of went off the rails. State of Decay 2, I have a history with. Are you guys aware of this? You probably aren't. So, 4 years ago was the year when State of Decay 2 was going to come out. I was looking forward to the game positively because I really liked State of Decay 1, and I was definitely hoping that the game was going to be great. Okay? Now, they did a really weird campaign. Listen to this. They provided copies of the game early to certain streamers to stream on Twitch. Okay? However, they provided said streamers with a very weird criteria, basically saying, you can stream the game early, and because you're streaming it early, obviously you're going to get advanced views. People are going to contribute to your streams for being able to play this game like a week early. But we're hitting you with what's called a review embargo. What that means is you can play the game, but you can't actually give your opinion on the game. So there were certain streamers who were able to play State of Decay 2 a week early, get tons of extra views and money from their viewership for doing so, but they couldn't actually say if they liked the game or not. That would have been violating the review embargo. Okay? So what happens when you're allowed to play a game but not actually comment on it? That's called paid advertisement. So anyone who played the game early was essentially a paid shill for Undead Labs and doing a paid advertisement for them. This is probably one of the most underhanded things in gaming, and it happens a lot. You just don't hear about the behind the scenes about it. Whenever you see someone playing a game super duper early, if there's still a review embargo in place, understand they cannot be honest about that game or they will get in trouble. All right? Now, I'm not saying this happens all the time, but you got to be very careful because these companies are doing their best to try to get free promotion and or paid promotion of their game that's dishonest. All right? So a lot of streamers played this game early, and during that week when they were doing so, I actually was on a kind of mini vacation with Kat, and I was not making any content for a few days, and people have been contacting me saying, Phil, are you aware that people got this game like super early and they're streaming it right now? What are your thoughts? So I posted up a tweet about it, and it blew up in a very, very negative way for hilarious reasons, because now I can actually speak to it truthfully. Back then I couldn't. The tweet said something as follows. I can't say it word for word, but it was like, oh, so State of Decay 2, anyone who's playing this game early, you got to understand something. They're a paid shill. They're literally doing a pay advertisement. So please understand that if you want to see people actually play this game for real, wait till later in the week when it's officially released and you can say whatever you want. In particular, I'm doing that this coming Friday, so please come check out my content, okay? Now, I said this on my own Twitter account. It wasn't like I went to someone else's timeline and I was commenting or I was interjecting on a story. All I did, I said it on my own stuff. All of a sudden, I start getting negative tweets from content creators all over the internet whining and complaining that I said this. Oh, you just don't understand how the industry works, Darkside Phil. Oh, you're just Mr. Sour Grapes because you couldn't get a copy of the game early, Darkside Phil. Really ignorant, dumb shit like that. One guy called me like an old crotchety guy who will never be successful and shit like that. By the way, the guy's an asshole, and I've kind of followed his content over the years. I see that he really is a fucking paid shill scumbag. Funny that he would, insult me publicly about it. So yeah, so at the time, I got such negative backlash against me, all right, that I basically made a public apology and I deleted the tweet, all right? However, after the game released, State of Decay 2 was a fucking piece of shit. This game was nowhere near as good as State of Decay 1. It cut out critical elements that made the first game good, including most of the story elements. The game basically tried to be more ambitious by adding in a bigger open world, but essentially just became a sim game with none of the things that made the original game interesting. State of Decay 2 was terrible, and everyone who played it early was a paid fucking shill, and it actually reinforced my fucking point that people can't trust that shit. So all those shitheads who actually attacked me on Twitter basically ate shit when the game came out and looked terrible, and critics panned the game and said it was bad. Okay? Now, behind the scenes at Undead Labs, unbeknownst to all of us, the reason that this happened is because the guy who was the head of the studio basically didn't care about the studio anymore. He wanted to make another studio and make other games, and he had his attention completely split, and he essentially let the game just kind of roll and release kind of unfinished. And then, the weirdest thing about all of this is that Microsoft bought the studio. Okay? They added Undead Labs to their portfolio of studios. It was almost like Microsoft just wanted to add a variety of studios to their library to say, oh, look at all these game studios we own now. So they bought out Undead Labs. And apparently when Microsoft bought out Undead Labs, the people who worked there already were kind of demotivated because they were like, damn, we have no direction. The person in charge of our company doesn't really care. The game we put out just got critically panned. We're hoping for the best, but now we don't feel so good about Microsoft because what if Microsoft comes in and really tries to change our culture? Well, apparently it was the opposite. When Microsoft bought Undead Labs, they didn't try to change anything at all. They had a very hands-off approach. The problem was the company had no direction. A new guy came in to run the company who apparently was a terrible leader, and then under him were people who were just kind of yes men and yes women. Like apparently there was a head of HR that was hired that was really known as a good HR person in the industry. But when people went to her with concerns like, man, I feel like I'm being mistreated by my boss. I feel like there's a lot of people who are just like, for example, in particular, women in the workplace felt like anytime they had an opinion, the men would brush them off and say, oh, well, you're, thanks for sharing, but whatever, on to the next topic, instead of actually taking them seriously. And apparently a large group of these employees were disgruntled and kept going to HR and saying, hey, why, can we get this addressed? We don't understand how this is fair. That we're the same level of employees as other people, but they get their opinions treated as, important, and we basically just get ignored when we have concerns. And apparently this HR person, who again was supposed to be like a head of HR in the industry, a leader, just said, oh, we'll handle it, we'll take care of it, and never did anything, and just kept brushing it under the rug. So after about a year now, after the release of State of Decay 2, they're trying to work on State of Decay 3. The game has no creative direction. All the teams are working on separate things, but there's no coherent whole, meaning there's no one who's actually taking control of the project and saying, let's combine this story element with this gameplay element with this and this. And there doesn't seem to be enough priority being placed on when will this game come together as something playable, as opposed to just make all these separate elements work and then eventually we'll slam them together with tape. So basically one of the worst ways you can develop a game. Okay? So, that being said, okay, basically, the game is a horrid mess, and all these concerns being given to HR being ignored, so these employees went to Microsoft and said, hey, Microsoft, what is going on? Why, our game's a mess, we have no leadership, and all our concerns are ignored by HR, what gives? And Microsoft went and had a meeting with the head of HR, and within a week, the head of HR left the company. And lied, by the way, and publicly said, oh, there was just a routine reorganization, and that's why I left. What? What? There was no reorganization. You're the only person who fucking left. Like, what are you talking about? So basically, a lot of people started leaving the company in droves, and basically this company's been falling apart at the seams since then. And I guess the story just broke yesterday. Of course, it was Kotaku. So take it with a grain of salt. But Kotaku did this research article about it, basically stating, if this is only one company, right? This is the state of one company right now within Microsoft that Microsoft has bought. Does this mean that basically all the companies that Microsoft bought don't get any help from Microsoft? Like, are they not doing anything to help them in any direction? Or are they just all left to fly by the seat of their own pants and do whatever? And Microsoft is like, well, we bought you, but we're just trusting in your own abilities to make a good game and run yourselves well, rather than actually interjecting any kind of direction or help at all. Maybe, maybe not. I guess what it is, you don't really know. This is really the only story that's out there right now. But essentially, what people are saying is that basically that game, this studio and the games they're pumping out are going to be a horrid mess, and there's nothing that can really be done because the studio is in shambles, and the people who work there are completely demotivated and don't really care, but it's just a job they want. They're basically afraid that if they leave, that they'll be blacklisted in the games industry. Like, what happens if you were working for a studio, you were acquired by Microsoft, everything should be going good, and then you decide to bail ship? Well, maybe people will see that as a negative and not want to hire you, right? So I definitely see at this point that this company is a mess, and it's kind of weird the way that it went down, that everything seems to be, presented as a positive, like, oh yeah, State of Decay 3 is still in development, don't worry about that. And you ask the employees of the company, like, no, this game's never coming out. And again, how many companies like that are under Microsoft's wing? Because it was really interesting when we saw Microsoft start to buy up companies 2-3 years ago. But now the question is, are any of those companies ever going to come to anything? Will there actually be games coming out from these studios Microsoft bought? Are they overseeing the projects, or do they just throw money around and now they're just letting everything just roll for itself? Which is not really a way to go about running a company. I don't know. The way I see it, it's kind of either extreme is bad. If you're completely hands-off, right, you could have an Undead Lab situation happen. Bad management, mistreatment of employees, ignoring the issues, and now the game's never going to come out. On the flip side of that, how many times have we seen publishers like EA get their hooks into something and ruin it, right? With BioWare, a company that's known for making narrative-based RPG content, oh, go make Anthem. Well, we don't want to because this is not what we like. We'll go make Anthem anyway. Well, this game's kind of like Destiny 2. Don't ever say Destiny. This game is not Destiny. Go make Anthem. And then look what happened with Anthem, right? So, that being said, I'm curious to see the future of these Microsoft-owned studios. I really am. I'm curious to see what's going to happen and if anything's going to come out of any of them. I think that some of them will do all right because some of them probably were well-developed and working well when Microsoft bought them. But in a case like Undead Labs, is this going to be a case in point now where Microsoft will realize we can't just let everyone just do whatever they want, and we maybe have to have some oversight and maybe have some creative control and do, you know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm thinking. And I guess it remains to be seen. I wish that it's all speculation at this point. That's the problem. Like, we don't have any evidence or any information from other companies yet that Microsoft bought, how they're doing. I would hope this is not the case because, let's be honest, we were all excited when we heard Microsoft buys this company, buys that company. But if they're completely hands-off on everything, how many more of these are going to happen? I mean, Bethesda, okay. Bethesda, they got their shit going. They've had their shit going for years. They put out major hits, whatever. State of Decay was kind of an anomaly. The company had never made a popular game before. Their first game blows up as a hit, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to keep pumping out great games. They're certainly not a Bethesda-level company. And the fact that the creative guy in charge of the company just decided to leave, that's a bad sign. So, I guess what we'll see is what happens moving forward. But this is just a big story that broke. I wanted to comment a little bit about it and the history about it. And, I know that this has nothing to do with the topic at hand. But, again, I just want to emphasize with everyone. Be careful what you watch out there. A lot of these people who play these games early are literally either being paid to do it or are actually getting positive benefit from getting that game early. Early views, early contributions from their audience. And they're not allowed to be honest about what they're saying and doing in the game because they're under a review embargo. That's not honest content. That's paid advertisement. That's dishonest shilling. And I hate to say it, but a lot of people can't see the difference between the two anymore.